Thanks for joining us for Season 5 of the Service to School Stories podcast. I'm Sydney Mathis, your host and Chief Program Officer at Service to School. This season, we wanted to highlight some of our incredible alumni and dive deeper into their stories. You'll hear from a variety of student veterans about their journey from the military through the admissions process and onto campus. Guests will share how they overcame challenges, and we'll look back on their journey to give some advice along the way. Let's kick it off. All right, welcome to Season 5 of the Service to School Stories podcast. Today, we are joined by Ed Somuk. He is a rising sophomore at Harvard. Ed, I will absolutely let you tell our listeners a little bit about your military background because you are certainly one of our older applicants, been in the military longer than most of our traditional applicants. But I am really excited to have Ed on the podcast today, sharing about his journey from the military to higher education. So, Ed, thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you for having me, Sydney. All right, so my name's Ed Somuk. I am originally from the great state of Connecticut, where we do taxes and college basketball really well. We're pretty good at traffic, too, if you've ever driven through our state. I joined the Marine Corps in 1995. I retired in 2021, so I served 26 years as a infantryman. I retired as a master sergeant because part of the reason why is because my wife joined the Air Force, so I'm married to an Air Force JAG here at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. I was fortunate enough to serve East Coast, West Coast, overseas. Spent 3 years in Okinawa. I was with the 2nd Marine Division, 1st Marine Division. I also served a little bit of time in the 4th Marine Division. I was actually a reservist for about a year and a half after my first 4 years of active duty. About 18 months of reserve time made me run screaming back to active duty. It really just wasn't for me. So one of my duties when I was active was I was a part of an OSO's office. All right, so on recruiting duty, I was an officer selection assistant. And this is right around 2008, 2009. And that really exposed me to working with college students, which means I spent a lot of time on college campuses, and I kind of was able to absorb a little bit of the culture. Now, I knew I was going to be a Marine when I was about 8 years old. And when you already have your path charted at that young of an age, you tend to neglect other things, such as really focusing on the world of academia. So high school for me was kind of more of just getting through it because I knew what my path was. So academics really didn't focus as much on it as perhaps I should have. And it wasn't until I was, well into my career that I started to realize, okay, you know what, I'm ready for academia as being part of my future. So it was then when I said, okay, when I retire, I'm going to go to college. I'm not going to do it online. I'm going to go be in a classroom, having spontaneous conversations with 18-year-olds, working with a college professor, being a part of a community, so that's what, that's really what started it for me. And I'm glad to say that once I retired, we went to Alaska for 2 years. That was my wife's first duty station. And then after that, Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And I started applying to colleges here, and Harvard allowed me to entrance to the university, and I just finished my freshman year.
Yeah. 2 follow-up questions. So at 8, did you come from a history of veterans? At 8, what was it that made you decide you wanted to join the Marine Corps?
So my father was a Marine. And I remember sitting at the dinner table with the family, and we're doing the traditional, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? I have 2 brothers. I have a twin brother and an older brother. And my older brother said, I'm going to join the Army. And my twin brother Matt said, I'm, I think it's firefighter or cop, whatever the standard choice is, when you're 8 years old and you have no idea. And then my mom asked me, and I said, well, what was dad? And she said, your father was a Marine. I said, are they good? And my mother said, they're the best. And I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
That's what you're
And
gonna do.
then it stuck with me going forward.
Yeah. And then the other opposite end of that. So you said, there was at one point in your career, you knew that education was going to be your next step. What was it about your experience in the military that told you your next step was education?
I think what kind of really planted it, in my brain was there was an opportunity because I was working in Raleigh, North Carolina,
Mhm.
and there was an opportunity to be go on campus at UNC Chapel Hill, and there were two attorneys there, and one had worked with the Obama administration, and one had worked with the Bush administration. And I think it was probably about 2009, 2010. I can't remember the exact date, but this is when the waterboarding was in the national spotlight, right? So the things that were going on at Gitmo and waterboarding was the hot topic. It was on every news program. And UNC had opened to the public these two attorneys that would come up there and talk about these are policy people, right? The folks that worked with the administration, were part of crafting these policies. And for an hour, I was able to sit there and listen to both of them, lay out, this is how we got to that point, but also lay out how our elected officials, are not always completely upfront with us, right? Being that, President Obama had stated, this is not America, we don't do this. But I found out during this gathering that in the fine print of their policies, the Obama administration had reserved the right to utilize these enhanced methods if they deemed it was necessary. So after, lambasting the previous administration, they still kept the door open just in case they felt that, we might need to use this as a technique, right? And that really, more than anything else, reminded me that if I wanted to know really what's going on in the world I live in, and really have facts and really, because I'm not going to get it from TV, I'm not going to get it from the news. I need to go to somewhere where you can study this stuff and you have resources and you're talking to folks who are in these positions, who are in the room when these decisions were made. And now the next part of their careers, they're sharing this information with, the next generation. So that's kind of what solidified to me the value of going to college and getting a formal education, is that I would have access to stuff like this all the time.
Right. So once you kind of had made that pivot, where did you start with your college research? Kind of how did you, begin the process?
So I love, being right there in Raleigh really helps because you're there. It's Tobacco Road, it's Duke, it's
Mhm.
Carolina, it's NC State, and then you have App State, UNC Wilmington, Wake Forest. All
Mhm.
these great universities are right there. I was going to go to UNC. I was going to go to Chapel Hill. I was going to be a Tar Heel. I was going to be part of that, the great traditions there. Basketball, football. A good education. I met my wife there. She was finishing law school. At Carolina. So for me, that was kind of how it was going to be done. And for the next 10 years of my career, I was taking online classes, a lot of them through UNC. When I was a North Carolina resident, I was getting in-state tuition. So the sorry, I'm blanking on the program. So my tuition assistance TA
Oh yeah,
program,
TA program.
would actually cover it. So I really didn't do a lot of research outside of just, I knew that's the school I wanted to go to. I loved the campus. I was familiar with it. I loved being up there. Um, so kind of everything got put on the back burner of, okay, yeah, retire. I'm going to apply, and then of course, as everything else in life happens, some doors open, some doors close. We went to Okinawa after we got married, came from Oki to Camp Pendleton. I finally made it to the promised land. I went to First Mardiv for 4 years. Um, and then, I retired and Allison got selected for Air Force JAG. First duty station, Eielson Air Force Base, right? Right outside of North Pole, Alaska, which is right outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. So dead center of the state. Think, southern Mississippi, but it's negative 35 in the winter, right? Very low resources. We were in a one-stop light town. Education is not a priority there, right? So thankfully, we only did 2 years there. But when my wife got orders to Hanscom, right around Thanksgiving, I said, okay, going to Massachusetts. I'm from that area. I'm from New England. I'm well aware that there are these great schools there. So, now is the time, right? I'm retired. I've been a stay-at-home dad for 2 years. I need to get out of that
Try
life.
something else.
I need to try something else because I love my kids, but man, that was rough. Um, so, but I needed to have more purpose again because I will now, I've always appreciated what stay-at-home parents do, but I never really felt it until I did it, especially in a remote area that's, harsh and has very little resources.
Yeah.
And it was brutal. It was really tough. And I found myself doing what I think a lot of veterans do when they transition out, especially after a lengthy career, was asking myself, like, is this it? Like, are my best days behind me? What do I have to look forward to besides, more difficulty, more hardship? And then, she got orders and I was like, okay, I'm going to start applying to colleges. And I applied to Brown, Boston College, both the UMass schools. I was applying as a transfer student. And how I started the process and how I recommend to every single person that is thinking about going into higher education after the military is I called these folks called service to school, who I had seen this advertisement for them on, online. And I just knew that I'd been out of the loop for so long. It would be nice to have someone just helping me through the process. And it was December 6th of 2022. And I'm sitting outside of Costco in Fairbanks, and it's -20 out. It's dark. I'm sitting in the truck, and I'm on my very first phone call with Sydney Mathis, who is asking me about my plans and asking me what's my number one school I'm reaching for. I said Boston College. It's competitive. It's a very good school. I think my values and their values line up. And you asked me, have you ever thought about Harvard? And I was like, of course I've thought about Harvard before. It's a great institution. I'll never get in, but it's wonderful. I grew up in the shadow of understanding that this place was, one of the most, vaunted, academic institutions in the world. I never really thought of myself as having a real shot at it, right? I wasn't a valedictorian in high school. I'm not a genius walking around. I'm not an entrepreneur. I haven't started my own business yet at 17 years old, right? All the things that we think of when we think of these ivory towers that is the Ivy League. And, you said to me, you'd be very, very surprised how someone with your background and your experiences and your view of the world would be welcome on these campuses. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. I never really thought I knew I was a long shot at best, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to put the effort in. I'm going to do it right. And it was not until mid-December that my wife, who's much smarter than I am, pointed out while I'm on Common App saying, hey, it says here that Harvard doesn't accept anything that's online, military transfer credit, vocational correspondence. She said, you might want to talk to them about if you're really applying as a transfer student or a first year. So I called up their admissions office, and to their credit, somebody answered the phone. Here it is. It's like December 19th or 20th, and they answered the phone, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're a first year, because unless you sat in a full-time program, like physically in a classroom, we don't accept any of that." So Brown accepted it, Boston College accepted it, Harvard does not, and that's one of the questions I get the most from other veterans who are looking to come in, who have done a lot of online schooling. Some even have an associate's degree through the Community College of the Air Force and through other online school. And I just tell them, well, the best I can tell you is call the admissions office. They're the best people to talk to. But I can tell you from experience, if it was online, it doesn't count for them. Other schools, yes. For them, no. So I had service to school provided me with a tremendous ambassador. I won't name him on this podcast because without his permission.
I'll get all the requests.
But exactly. Great guy who, I'm literally, my application's due in 10 days, right? And this excellent gentleman said, look, I'm going to be visiting family in Maine, but don't worry, my comms are up. Just send me your application, Google Doc, and going back and forth. And he's helping me out, making edits, making suggestions. But he really understood how to take my experiences and leverage, how that would relate to what I bring to the classroom, right? He basically said, look, you have a lot that these schools can't buy, right? You face adversity, resiliency, your maturity, your view of the world, the things you've seen, the things you've done. These things can't be taught in the classroom. They have to be lived experiences. And they would love to have someone like you sitting in the classroom as long as you're willing, put yourself out there and say, hey, I want to come to your school and I want to not only, learn from you, I also want to share my experiences with, my new peers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been very big on, the younger generation, although, their lives are very different than how I grew up, but I don't dismiss out of hand, their experiences. And I've always been a big believer in the teacher, leader, mentor, role model relationship.
Yeah.
And I also always wanted to be a part of a college campus and a college community, right? So it wasn't just me being transactional and saying, hey, I want to get into Harvard because, I want to study there. It was also, here's all the things that I'm going to bring with me to the classroom, and here's how I'm going to be an added asset, with my new 19-year-old peers. And I have
Yeah.
absolutely no problem having my position challenged because that's what college is all about.
Yep.
So I was, I got my application in, and I was sitting on my couch in North Pole, and it's about 4:30 in the afternoon. You've heard this story before, and so at the time my kids are, about seven-ish, four-ish, and my youngest was about 2.5, and he was going through a potty training regression where he liked to come up to me and tap me on the shoulder, whisper in my ear that he just pooped in his pants. We thought we were there. We got him there, and those of you with kids know this. You get them to that stage, you think they're good, and then all of a sudden they kind of look at you like, oh, this is a positive for you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take a step back real quick. So instead of getting angry with him, which I did the first several times, I figured, you know what, I need to find a different approach. So I pulled in the other two, his older brother, his older sister. I said, all right, guys, look, I need your help here, right? Every time Gary uses the potty the right way, we need to make sure that we tell him what a great job he did. I want to encourage him. We want to make sure he knows that this is a good thing, right? So I'm sitting on the couch, and the kids are all upstairs. We had our entire second floor of our house was basically a big playroom. And I'm going through my emails. I'm just kind of clearing out my junk email because 3 times a day you got to clear out your emails these days because you get all this stuff. And when you apply to these colleges, through Common App, you have a portal for each school where you're uploading documents and you're keeping track of things, and they're pinging you all the time with updates, this, that, and everything. And this is March 10th, March 11th. Ivy Day is not till March 31st, so I wasn't expecting to hear anything from them on admissions. So I get an email, hey, there's an update to your application for, in My Harvard. Okay, great. I pull that open, and I'm getting ready to hit open, and the kids start, going crazy upstairs, and I'm like looking up, like, what is it, And my oldest comes running down, Gary pooped in the potty. Gary pooped in the potty, Great, all right, great. And I'm thinking, oh, I better get up there and supervise the second half of this process, right? So I'm walking up the stairs, and I'm clicking, open to open up the notification I have. And I get to the top of the stairs, and I think we've all experienced these times in life where we get this information presented to us, and our brain will only process fractions of it at a time because we go into shock. Because pulled up in front of me is a letter from the admissions office, from the dean of admissions, and I just see, sporadically, congratulations, accepted, Harvard, class of 2027, right? And I'm just standing here shocked, and there's like, fake confetti coming flying down on the email attachment. I'm just sitting here like, holy moly, like I actually got in, and I just was kind of overwhelmed for about 6 seconds where I was able to allow myself to be emotional. I kind of looked up to God and said, thank you for this opportunity. And then reality set back in. I was like, I better get in that bathroom before something ends up on the walls, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to expect, right? So I go in there, and there he is, and he's proud of himself. His pants are still around his ankle. It looks like there's no damage done. Okay. So now I'm going into mode like, okay, I have to share this information, right? So with one hand, I'm cleaning him up. The other hand, I'm texting my wife, and I'm wearing readers now, so I didn't have them on, so I'm squinting through my message, and I'm trying to get it sent out to her. I hit send on it, still taking care of him. And of course, she doesn't answer within, 7 seconds. So now I'm
Right.
calling and I'm getting the voicemail, right? Like, how dare you be doing something other than being available? And so then, she calls me right back and she's like, hey, what's up? I was in a meeting. I'm like, check your email. I said, check your messages. I'm like, have you checked your messages yet? Like, no, check them. Because I sent a screenshot of the acceptance letter. And she said, okay, I'll do that. She tells me to this day that she knew when I told her that. She knew I'd gotten in. She said the same tone of voice I was using and the same urgency was when we were sitting in my mom's kitchen in 2015. And I'd gotten selected for Master Sergeant for the below zone. Completely unexpected. And she said it was the exact same tone of voice you were using, so I knew. She said she always knew I would get in. I was like, oh, okay, sure. But yeah, so that's how she knew. That's how I found out I got into Harvard. It wasn't the same as what you see on YouTube and ABC News when it's some young prodigy sitting at the kitchen table and everyone's dressed up like they just came from a wedding, and they click it open after hitting refresh several thousand times and everyone's running around in circles and screaming and stuff like that. Mine was a little more real world. So yeah, that's how that all went down. And I also got into Brown. I got into Boston College. Both the UMass schools accepted me. That was a rolling admissions process. And at Brown, I would have matriculated as a junior.
Mm.
And at Boston College, I would have matriculated as a second semester sophomore. I'm very happy that I went the start all over portion. I mean, there I was, orientation, sitting there with the 18-year-olds, doing all the, and doing all the stuff that they do. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm not 18. I'm a little bit different, but you have to be willing to, do all that stuff, right? So Harvard does something called Visitas, right? So it's a play on Veritas, which is the school's motto, which is true. And Visitas is Visitors Weekend, where prospective students come in, and you can ask for a host, which means you'll spend the weekend in a dorm with another freshman hosting you. So of course, I asked for that, and because I wanted to do the full thing, right? And told them nothing about myself. All they knew was my name and that I was coming from Alaska. And I end up on this group chat, and I'm getting these text messages like, "Yo, what's up, y'all? We need to get pumped for Visitas." I'm like, "Oh, here we go." So I'm like, "Hey guys, really excited. Just quick introduction. Hey, I'm Ed." And I'm updating my host. I'm sitting in the tarmac in Philadelphia. Like, "Hey, I'm going to be about 3 hours later than I thought." He's like, "No worries. Just when you get here, come to the dorm. Come up to my room. You could drop your stuff off, and then just go do all the things you want to do." So I show up, and I hump my suitcase all the way up the stairs, and I knock on this door, and kid opens the door, and he's got like this hair, Greg Brady hair, like out to here, and he's looking at me a little confused. I'm like, "Hey, are you so and so?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I'm Ed." He's like, "Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, right." So where am I staying, guys? Right. So I came in there and I slept on a, a dorm floor of Holworthy Hall with about 12 other, incoming freshman students, because I wanted to have that experience. Because being an older college student, right, especially if you have a wife and kids, you're not going to have the full traditional experience. Like you
Right.
just and sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's a bit of a downer. As I've gone through my first year, I'm kind of looking back at it now. Like, I'm glad I'm not dealing with any of that stuff. Dorm rooms are small and cramped, and I don't really
Yeah.
want to have 8 roommates. I've got 4 now, one that's an adult, 3 that aren't. So there's a lot that comes with that. But yeah, so I've kind of got one foot in, one foot out. I have a house I can go to at the end of the day, which is nice.
Yep.
But at the same time, everything that happens with the school happens on the campus. So when there's a guest speaker that comes in or an event that happens on like a Wednesday at 5 p.m., it takes a significant amount of preparation and planning for me to be able to attend some of this stuff, just because childcare
Yeah.
and making sure that my wife works. So if there's any advice I can give to older students on just being a college student in that regard, is it's a lot. There's more logistical considerations. Just you got to plan. You can do it. You can make it happen, and you can make it work. You just got to make sure that you have a plan in place and you have resources available. plenty of babysitters on the Rolodex, on
Yeah,
speed dial, and a very supportive wife, which I have.
for sure. Two questions about your on-campus experience here, Ed. So you had mentioned you'd taken classes online. Talk to us a little bit about the difference between like the academic rigor between the online classes that you had taken and your current coursework at Harvard.
Sure. So, you know, probably the biggest, difference between the online and in person is you have the spontaneous conversations that take place, right? Not everyone communicates very well through a written medium. A
Hmm.
lot of things get lost in translation. Um, there's just something about being able to raise your hand and ask for clarification, immediately right now on, what this is saying. When someone's delivering something to you, especially instructions, in person is always going to be much, much better than, you know, online. And I found that whenever I was doing online stuff and we were typing into the forum, and we're answering each other, the conversation kind of gets, watered down, right? Because a lot of time passes between people, what people are posting in there. And then it was just really, um, a lot of it came off as disingenuous, right? Yes, Chuck, that's a very great point you made, and I can see how you would feel that way. But that doesn't happen in real conversations. Like
Right.
I've had some good discussions with classmates in class where like the glasses came off, and I'm like, really, you really feel that way? Where we've had some good, you can't have a spirited conversation, and for me, that's the learning process. The learning process for me is when we're sitting in a small group and we're discussing a reading and we're going back and forth on what we took from this, and then kind of one person brings up something that you didn't think of at all. With the online medium, it feels like there's no real back and forth. It's just everyone, this is what I took from this myself, and they just kind of throw it out there, and there's really not much pushback. There's not a whole lot of, well, I took, I understood something a little bit differently. You just you can't replicate that, So for me, that's the biggest difference between being able to do this stuff online and in person. And there was a second half of your question. I forgot what it was
Yeah,
already.
no, I hadn't asked it yet. So you're right on track. The second part is, I think a lot of students come to service to school and are eyeing schools like the Harvards, the Princetons, the Yales, right? And we discourage students from doing some of the trophy chasing, as you alluded to before. You have to, have a really solid understanding of why, these institutions and these classrooms are the best places for you to continue your studies. So, from your perspective, what is kind of when you're on campus, like, what is that like for you? Like I just imagine students there, it's like you're walking around and just like constantly just being in awe of the, students and the community and the learning opportunities. What is that experience like on campus and in the classroom?
So I'm glad you asked that because, I something I alluded to in my application was I was kind of making fun of the romance that's attached to colleges because it's the same in the military, right? There's just such this romantic view, and I imagine I'd be strolling through Harvard Yard, latte in hand, you know,
Leaves
you
bristling across the ground.
under my feet,
Uh,
cello concerto number one, in my ears as I watch the lone pilot, of his rowing his boat across the Charles River. Because every movie you've ever seen about
yeah.
college students at Harvard, there's some kind of cello music playing, and they're hard at work in the library, and everything's bright and cheery. And although that's not reality because it's a lot of work, um, walking through Harvard Yard for me is, it really is, it's my favorite place because people that I've studied throughout history, because I've always been like a bit of an amateur historian, even when I was a teenager, I've always loved the subject of history. That's why I'm studying it in college. But I think all the time about those that, walked this ground before me. John Adams, was a student at Harvard. Right? FDR went to the business school there. Barack Obama was at the law school, right? So I'm fortunate enough that I'm at a school. My criteria for what college I wanted to go to, the only criteria I had was I want it to be driven by education. So academics is the number one priority, and it has some history and has some tradition to it, right? So And I get that where I am now. It's the oldest educational institution in the country, and a lot of I don't care about the famous people that have gone through there, but a lot of important people in our history have an attachment to that, and now I get to be part of that same legacy, and that's pretty darn cool. You know, the reason why I applied to Harvard was I wanted to go somewhere that I could get the best education I could get for myself from faculty that take my education as seriously as I do. We look at a lot of the institutions in our country these days, and sometimes people choose the college they want to go to based off of sports teams, or based off of other superficial metrics. And for me, I can always watch. I'm a Michigan fan. I can always watch them. That is a very good academic institution, by the way. But that wasn't my driving factor. My driving factor wasn't politics. It wasn't sports teams. It wasn't this specific program, that specific program. What's the best education I can get? Where can I apply geographically? Because I was locked in geographically, right? It's going to be the greater Boston area. So for me, it was just wherever the best education I can get, because I believe there is an intrinsic value to a liberal arts education. An education is something that can't be taken away from you. Education teaches you how to think. Education will teach you. I'm not learning a whole lot of, in some regards, not a whole lot of new things, but I'm evolving in how I view a lot of things, because I'm now being given a lot more information than I've been given before, because I'm in a place where when you are dedicating yourself to studying this stuff and you're doing this, you're reading, 3 hours a day, that is what allows you to absorb more of this stuff. And I have a much deeper understanding of a lot of things, much more than before I started studying it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about the veteran community there? I know you're recently starting to get pretty involved with the veteran club. Talk with our listeners a little bit about the community that you've surrounded yourself with.
Yeah, so we have at Harvard, we have what's called the Harvard Undergrad Vet Organization. That was started in 2016. And this is when there was like 4 veteran undergraduate students at Harvard. We just admitted to the class of 2028. I think 21 veterans accepted, 21 accepted from my class. So from 2016 to 2024, we've grown from a handful, maybe 6 to 8, to close to 100. Harvard is, and all the other Ivy Leagues are looking more at the value that veterans are bringing, especially since I think higher education has kind of looked at the monster they've created. They've created a kind of a cookie cutter system to where they've looked on their campus and they've realized, they're all kind of the same in a lot of regards, and we're not getting a lot of newer, different perspectives. I think they're getting that now from the veteran community, especially those of us who have, OIF, OEF veterans. Those of us, who have served overseas, done humanitarian work. We have very unique experiences that you're not going to get at a prep school. So I think the value that veterans bring to the classroom is being recognized more and more by the admissions offices, and that's why the population is growing. And that's also why schools like Dartmouth and Brown are growing their veteran resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as our student population grows, the partner schools that we work closely with also are kind of not matching that same growth at the same, speed and percentage each year, but we are really excited about the growth of the student communities on some of these campuses. So, Ed, as we wrap up, what is your last piece of advice for students that are either just beginning the admissions process or are even thinking about, starting that transition and considering applying to, colleges as their next step?
Well, the first piece of advice I would give is don't ever discount the value that you bring to these universities. Right? A lot of us, especially on the enlisted side, we're very limited in the things that we're able to do. What I mean by able is, we fill a certain role, and it's very rare that we can actually grow outside of that role. And so a lot of veterans tend to think that, well, I wouldn't do well in college. I wouldn't survive well in college. I've been out for a while, and, I've never been, a genius in this, that, or other thing. So we discount ourselves. We already self-select ourselves out of the process. I will tell you right now that veterans thrive on these college campuses because we have the discipline, We have the drive. We have the ability to just grind, which is a lot of what college work is. It's just grinding and working hard. And, there's nothing I've done at Harvard that I haven't accomplished through hard work. I'm doing very well for myself. I'm not just, barely making it. I'm actually doing extremely well. So don't select yourself out. Get it out of your head right now that you're not worthy or you're not worth it or you wouldn't do well or you don't belong. Get that out of your head right now. If you have any desire for higher education, start applying. Apply early as you possibly can, because it just, I was fortunate enough that Common App's a great thing, and I had an ambassador that worked closely with me, and I was able to quickly do a quick turnaround to get my application in. If I could have done it differently, I would have started much earlier, but my timeline was compressed from the start.
Yep.
SATs, ACTs, I was very lucky that when I got accepted, when I applied, the SAT was still optional. Schools are going back to it now being a requirement. So start, if you haven't, if you didn't do as well on your SAT as you wanted to, or you haven't, done this stuff in a while, because I think they're good for about 5 years, start hitting the books now. There's a ton of resources out there. The higher your score is, the less explaining you have to do, right? Like a really good SAT score or ACT score will forgive other things. But don't think that the median SAT score at Harvard is a 1530. But if you're a veteran with life experience and other things that you bring to the table that nobody else does, you don't need to be on par with that SAT score. You want to submit the best one you have. But once again, we bring things that nobody else has. So, there are folks who have gotten in with much lower, bottom 10th percentile SAT scores because they made a compelling case as to, well, I bring all this other stuff with me. Also, if you're, married, you have kids, think about your future after undergrad. I would recommend finding, geographically, where do you want to end up after college and start looking at schools there. Because we have other things that we have to worry about. Public school, the school system for our kids, opportunities for them. I'm fortunate that I'm in Massachusetts, and although traffic is terrible, there's a lot of sports programs here for my kids. And Massachusetts has one of the best education systems in the country. And I have family in Connecticut, which is a 2.5 hour drive away. So I have things in this place where we can stay here after my college is done and we can set roots here. Yep. So I would you have to consider all these things, schools for your kids, logistics, where you be living, cost of living. Because if we didn't live on Hanscom Air Force Base, and I didn't have, I'm a retiree. So when my wife exits the Air Force, we can stay on base. I live in one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. Mm-hmm. And fortunately for me, I don't need to go buy a $900,000 house because I live on base and I can stay on base. So there's so many things outside of just the school itself that more non-traditional students with, families have to think about. So you have to take all that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ed, this has been so fun. Even just watching you through this journey, from that initial onboarding call, having you at our VetLink Summit in Chicago, and just continuing to see the amazing things you all are doing on campus there at Harvard and advocating for your peers. Thank you for, spending time with us and continuing to support the work that we do at Service to School, but also just continuing to support, like I said, your veteran peers through higher education. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up our episode today with Ed. Ed also does info sessions for Harvard for veterans that are thinking about Harvard as a school on their list. So definitely be on the lookout for events hosted by Ed and the Huvo vets there at Harvard. So thanks for joining us today, Ed.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School's CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.